Hello, I'm Frank Jernigan, the developer of the website franco.com. I would like to do a demonstration of how the saddle shoulders work. The instructions are kind of confusing, and it didn't help any that I had originally put in an error into the technical tip, which contradicted what the instructions said to do as to where to place the first marker. So to correct that and to clarify any misunderstanding of how to do it, I'd like to show you how to begin the saddle shoulder sweater. The first thing I'd like to point out is that the instructions say to use a long tail cast on and cast on a certain number of stitches, and then with a second strand of yarn and using this standard long tail cast on the same number of stitches on the same needle, work both saddles at the same time. Now, why do you need to do them both at the same time when you're going to just knit two strips of fabric that are some certain number of rows long? The instructions also say to start knitting with a right side row, knit an odd number of rows, and you will end also on a right side row. This is what happens if you start one, knit it, end on a right side row, and then begin the next one by casting on stitches. If I'm going to start this row to match the other one by knitting a right side row, I'm going to turn it around and I'm going to knit this row. And so look, the right side of this one over here is facing me and the right side of the other one is facing away. The right side needs to face both in the same direction. So that's why it's important to do them simultaneously. You might try to find a workaround, so you could do them separately, but I don't know why you would struggle with that, since the chances of getting it wrong are more. When you are knitting them both 11 rows long, or some odd number, and you knit them the same time, you know they're the same length, even if you did 13 instead of 11 or whatever. So anyway, if you then thought, well, I'll just purl that first row and then knit it back as a right side row, you now have two rows ending with a right side row, and you can't end up with a wrong number, an odd number of rows ending on a right side row. So even the length of them would be off by one if you did that. If you then said, no, I'll just reorient the stitches after I'm done, that will require manipulating those stitches several times, passing them off to another needle, switching to the other end of the needle, passing them back onto this one, and even then you may not have them oriented correctly. So all of that is said, let's just start the way the directions say and cast on the stitches for both and knit both at the same time. So I'm going to take this out and start over. And I'm going to knit on, and I'm following a child size pattern, by the way. I'm going to cast on 9 stitches on each side, and then I'll pick up at that point in just a bit. Okay, here's where I am after casting on the stitches for both saddles at once. And as you see, I placed a marker to mark the right shoulder right after I cast it on, the first series of stitches. This becomes very confusing later on when you can't remember which is the right and which is the left, and the pattern says to do this on the right shoulder and do that on the left shoulder. It's always good to know which one is the right, and it's the one with the marker. I often use a red marker because right stands for red. Both start with R, I mean. So just a way to keep it correct. We then knit across both swatches, starting with a knit row. And now, of course, we turn the work and we purl back across both of them. And we do that for an odd number of rows, which leaves us in this position after having knitted a right side row with both yarns, both live yarns coming off the left side of the saddle that they knitted. So I will continue this after I've got the saddles knitted, and I'll show you how to pick up stitches around the shoulder. Now I've completed the 2 saddles for this child-sized sweater. I'm sure you can translate it to an adult size, as this is just an example. And I have finished by knitting a right side row all the way across. I have the marker that I placed after I cast on the first stitches that makes this the right hand. This is the right shoulder saddle. This is the one that's going to go on the right shoulder, and this will be part of the neckline. So the saddle is going out from the shoulder and then will go down the sleeve. The instructions say, starting at the first stitch below the final stitch just worked, using the right hand needle, place a marker and pick up and knit a certain number of stitches along the selvage edge to the cast on edge. This is the selvage edge, this is the cast on edge. So you turn and pick up the stitch using the right hand needle, that is the right hand as you were just finishing the row. You will then pick up stitches along this selvage edge, and you start like this. That's 1. My pattern calls for 7. There are 11 rows, so I'm going to skip 4 rows. One way to see where to pick it up is to find the first column of stitches that is an actual column after the selvage stitch. It's hard to tell where you're picking it up if you get confused by how the selvage stitch looks, but you can always find the first column after that that makes a full row, and you want to pick up right in between that column and the selvage stitch. I make sure I pick one up in the very last row, because that will be part of my neckline. This creates the stitches along the front of the right shoulder. This will be the front of the sweater. We then turn the work and purl back across those picked up stitches. And I forgot to place my marker in. The instructions told me to place, so I'll put it on now. And then I continue around the shoulder and just continue purling across the saddle stitches. In order to be able to continue with the next instruction, I need to free up the needles a bit, and the way to do that is to pull the needle out and create a loop in the cable in the middle of the saddle stitches. The pattern calls this a magic loop, and if you're familiar with magic loop circular knitting, then that will make sense to you. If you're not, it probably would be more confusing to call it that. So now I'm going to pick up purlwise and purl 9 stitches, and that's a little trickier, but it can be done. I simply find the place by turning the swatch over and looking at the other side of the saddle I simply turn the swatch around, and looking at the other side of the saddle, I pick up a stitch purlwise. I look on the right side of the fabric each time I pick up a stitch to make sure I get it in the right place. And again, I forgot to place my marker, but I can put that on when I get back. The next instruction says, with a second strand of yarn and working with the other saddle and the other needle, pick up and knit 7 stitches along the selvage edge on the back left saddle. This is the left saddle. This is the back left is here. Let me show you how it's oriented. If you laid the saddles out the way they'll be worn, they will look like this. This is the right saddle, and the saddle extends from the neck down to the shoulder. This is the left saddle, and it extends from the left side of the neck down to the left shoulder. I'm going to pick up stitches along this selvage edge with this needle in order to pick up stitches along the back of the left shoulder. As you see, left and right become very confused. Pick up and knit 7 stitches. This side is worked just like the other. You turn and purl back across those stitches. Well, it's not exactly like the other, but similar to the other one. Now I'm going to place the marker that I forgot to place before. I then knit across the saddle. Sorry, I'm purling across the saddle. And now I'm going to place a marker and pick up purlwise 7 stitches along this edge. And just as I did before, I'm going to pull a loop out of the middle of those stitches to make that possible. The instructions then say to turn back across the picked up stitches, and then across the saddle, I'm going to pull my magic loop out so I can continue knitting across the saddle. And I end at the sleeve marker on the back left shoulder. Now we break the yarn. As usual, I'll break it with a pair of scissors. And then finally we slip the remaining stitches of the left shoulder from the left needle to the right needle. So after you reorient everything, this is what it now looks like. You can start to see this will be your neck hole. This is the right, actually this is the left shoulder, because this one has the red marker on it, which is the right shoulder. So if I were orienting it the way I'm sitting, when I wear the sweater, it will look like this. This will be the front, this is the back, and this is the right shoulder, this is the left shoulder. The instructions now tell me to knit around the right shoulder. On the right shoulder, knit around the shoulder to front neck edge. This is the front neck edge, and that's where I'm knitting to. I'm knitting around here, across the saddle, and around to there. In order to continue around the shoulder, I'm going to have to pull a magic loop out of that saddle again. I just continue knitting around this, across the saddle and around down the front side of the saddle to the neckline. And that's how you begin the saddle shoulders. From then on, you are just continuing to knit around the shoulders and joining across the back of the neck. And then you knit from one neck edge to the next neck edge all the way around the back until you're finished shaping the neck line for the sweater. I hope that helps, and I hope it cleared up a lot of confusion that you might have had. Thank you. Have a nice day.